I'm sitting here today with Atlantic University faculty member Robin Weeks. At the university, Robin teaches 4 courses: Meditation in the Inner Life, Religion, Spirituality, and the Transpersonal, Origin and Destiny of Human Consciousness, and his personally developed course, Science and Spirituality. Robin has a BS in Geophysical Sciences from the University of Southampton, a Ph.D. in Geophysical Sciences from the University of California, and an MA in Religious Studies from Naropa University in Colorado. So thank you, Robin, for sitting with me here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
You are very welcome. So you have an impressive and diverse background, which we didn't get into too much, but I do have a few questions for you, and maybe we can dig into that a little bit more. So tell me, what has been your personal journey in relationship to the consciousness of the natural world, and what is your relationship like now with it?
Well, I actually began in my childhood having a very close relationship with nature. I grew up in the country in Britain, and I remember spending a lot of time alone out in the country, playing in streams and things like that. And what I primarily remember about it is this tremendous sort of feeling of peacefulness. I never felt lonely out there, and it was sort of a real sense of absorption and connection with nature. And I think that led me, my thinking as I grew older was that if I went into science, I could get closer to nature, I could know nature better. And so that's what I did. And I followed a science career, and my qualifications in research have all been in what you would call the earth sciences. So studying the earth, sometimes studying the other planets, but always about that thing that I loved when I was a child. But what I found was that as I got deeper and deeper into this realm of science and studying nature that way, I felt myself actually losing that connection that I originally felt with nature. And actually, in my mid and late 20s, I described myself as being a fundamentalist scientist. So fundamentalist in the sense that I believed that science was the only truth, and that the only reliable things that we could ever learn were through science, and that things like religion and myth and spirituality were sort of fairy tales, actually. And so I had a bad attitude, I would say. And so this sort of represents a kind of arc where I became more and more disconnected from nature. And then that arc started to come back the other way, and I started to actually get into meditation. I had what you might call spiritual experiences, and I ended up leaving my science career to do religious studies at Naropa. And at that time, I was hiking a lot in the mountains of Colorado, and I noticed that these two things that we think are so separate, science and spirituality, sort of came together, for me personally at least, while I was out in nature, that they somehow sort of could coexist in a sort of beautiful way out in nature. And so that became a great interest of mine. And I would say that's increased, and now I live in Sedona. I spend a lot of time in nature. I'm a hiking guide here. And when I'm out in nature, I'm always trying to help people connect more deeply with nature. And what I feel when I'm out in nature is, and I could describe it by one simple word, is home. I feel like I'm at home. And that home means that I'm not actually isolated and alone. I feel connected, sort of, you might say, like a part of the cosmos. I feel like I belong here. I'm a part of the cosmos. And there's been periods of my life when I felt like I really didn't belong, that isolated and separated, alone, on a tiny little planet, you know. And so it's really shifted for me, and nature has changed my life. And I have a lot of weird beliefs now, such as nature is not as passive as we think her to be. and such that, there's a great, you get a great kind of support from being out in nature to connect with the whole. It's there for you in some way, and it's rooting for you, no pun intended. And so,
or pun totally intended, and it worked.
yeah, maybe.
Totally worked.
So I have a very sort of special I feel like it's a special relationship with nature now, and it's sort of, I feel like it connects me to a kind of wider consciousness. So use that word consciousness. It's like I have consciousness, but my consciousness exists within a wider consciousness, and that's very important to me now. And that's and so that's become significant.
Do you think going through your scientific earth science career pushed you away from being so close to nature, but then also you said there was this tipping point that kind of made you come back? How did that work? How did that science world you were in affect you, and also getting you back to nature?
Yes, because there are, well, some things that I've noticed, and this may simply apply to me as a scientist, but I also feel like that one could argue that it applies generally to, at least to mainstream science, that that I had certain attitudes and beliefs that explicitly separate me from nature. And so one of those sets of beliefs was that nature is essentially mechanical, so that it operates according to these laws of nature that we're so fond of in science, and that really the laws of nature explain everything. Everything is really moving atoms and molecules that are arranging themselves in different ways according to the laws of nature. And so I might have consciousness, my beliefs told me that out there in the natural world, consciousness did not exist. And then there's a certain things that science does. One of them is we pretend that science explains things, and we like to use that word a lot. So things are explained. And actually, the more I dug into that philosophically for myself, the more I realized we didn't really explain things. We describe things in great detail, but we don't actually explain them. And so what happened for me was there was this sort of rising sense of, from being someone who really knew what was what, I know what the truth is, and I know that science produces it. I sort of slowly shifted over to this person who became like a not knower. It's like, I don't know what's what. And really, what I seem to be encountering more and more is a sense of mystery, and that mystery is something that I call irreducible. It's an irreducible mystery. You can't get rid of it. So as much as I might want to, using my science or other means, I actually can't get rid of that mystery, and nor should I want to get rid of it, because it's actually something we need.
That's a really interesting concept, actually, because as a scientist, you need to know. You want to define everything and come up with the reasoning. And you've kind of, were saying, as you were on this more spiritual quest, the not knowing was okay.
That's right. And in fact, I think a spiritual quest requires you to not know. Because, and in fact, in Zen Buddhism, they have this thing called, don't know mind. It's like you have to cultivate don't know mind, because the more you actually think you know, the more your mind is on rails and it's closed, and you can't open up to perspectives that are beyond your limited beliefs. And so you in fact have to know. And there's quotes in the Upanishads and all kinds of quotes about the importance of not knowing. And to the extent what they say, he who doesn't know knows, and he who knows doesn't know. You'll find phrases like that. Mm-hmm. So in the realm of spirituality and mysticism, not knowing is a way of kind of emptying the vessel, so that you can be filled by this wider awareness. And but it's the strange thing is, it's important for a scientist too. It's like, as a scientist, you really are really is a good idea to have an open mind, and you don't realize that you don't.
True.
Yeah.
That's interesting, because I guess as a scientist, your quest is, like we were saying, to know and answer the questions and figure it all out. But what are you figuring out?
Well, it's interesting because there are these impressions we have of science, sort of like the general public may have impressions of science. And then from the perspective of actually doing science, you might get a very different impression of it. And if you talk to many scientists, I've got examples of well-known scientists saying things like, you know what, there's no end to what we can know. And then if you go around and interview scientists, do you think that science will ever know everything? The predominant answer you get is no, we'll never know everything. So there's this sort of sense that science does sort of fill this role of kind of describing the world and enabling us to use aspects of the world for technology and things. But ultimately, there's always going to be a domain that's left unexplained. There's going to be domains, or actually, I personally don't think that science ever explains anything, actually. It describes things, but it doesn't ever explain anything. So this mystery remains irreducible. It's like, so then it's like a question of like, let's get used to the idea of this mystery. What does that mean for me? And the mystery is a beautiful thing because it can be explored, and you can explore it through spirituality, and you can explore it through science, but you can never make it go away. And so it ends up being this beautiful thing that we end up sort of living the mystery in a way.
We do live a mystery.
Yes.
You develop the science and spirituality class. Is this some of the subject matter you delve into?
Yes, we do. And, I just feel like one of the most important things is, first of all, we've had the scientific revolution, as we call it in history, started about 400 years ago, 1600s. And so we've had a sort of changing worldview in our culture over 400 years. And it's so deeply ingrained in us today that many of us, perhaps the majority, don't realize how that has affected how we see and relate to the world, especially the natural world. Mm-hmm. So this scientific view, which really holds us as having our own consciousness and being separate entities from the old. In fact, mainstream science doesn't even admit that we have a consciousness. So for most of mainstream science and neuroscience, the consciousness is some kind of trick or illusion called an epiphenomena. So for many years we've built up this worldview. So the course tries to expose this worldview that even in people who are quite spiritual, they still hold on certain levels this worldview, and it needs to be exposed. So we expose the worldview as much as we can, and then we actually look at what science really is. And science isn't really what we think it to be. So when you sort of delve into it a little bit philosophically, you find that science isn't quite what we thought it was, and it progresses in ways we didn't think it progresses and things like that. So we deal with what science really is, how it works. We deal with the new science of quantum theory and relativity, those things, and what's the significance of those. And then we go into spirituality, and then at the end of the class we try and put it all together.
So you're also dealing with people's identity as it relates to science and religion, their own perceptions, belief systems.
Yes.
How do you, or can you, work with that in the class, break through that?
Actually, it's very difficult because I am going to use my glasses here, because worldview functions like a pair of glasses, right? So if I want to know what my worldview is, and let's just admit for now that we all have one. We all have a worldview, and so that controls to some extent the way we see the world and relate to the world and what we do. The worldview functions like a pair of glasses. So I'm looking through this pair of glasses, but I don't see that I'm wearing a pair of glasses. How do I see that I'm wearing a pair of glasses when whatever I look at through the glasses? So to see the pair of glasses, you actually have to take them off. And then, it's a pair of glasses. So, so what we try to do is change the glasses. And I don't have another pair. Yes, I do. I have another pair. So I'll put this pair of glasses down, and I'll put another pair of glasses on. Don't see quite as well through these. It looks a little different. And we do these experiential exercises where we try on different worldviews and I have the students go out into nature and see how that affects their relationship with nature. That's one of the ways. So we think about it, we try to expose the ideas that relate to our modern worldview, and then we try to play around with changing the worldview using our imagination. Imagination is pretty much the most powerful thing I think we have. And so we try, and so we try to use it to sort of break free. You know, Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. That's why, because he used his imagination to produce a paradigm shift in science, caused the rest of Newtonian physics to be sort of thrown out the window. So that's the power of imagination. What we need, many of us, what we need is a kind of paradigm shift, a kind of insight. And so the imagination, I think, is perhaps the main tool for doing that.
But you're still asking people they need to become aware that they're wearing glasses, self-aware of my glasses, of
Yes.
the lens in which I'm looking through. So
Yes.
first I have to know there's a lens, and then I have to look up
Yes.
and change the input and output of what's going on around me.
That's right. It's a very challenging thing to do, actually, but it's not so challenging at Atlantic University as it would be at many other schools. The students are quite open to it at Atlantic University. In a mainstream university or college, I think it would be a lot more challenging to try and look at our worldview. But one way to look at it, both as individuals but also as a culture, is to look at what we do. So because I might profess certain beliefs, and I'll, I say what I think, but what I do actually belies what I really think and what I believe. So it's through what I'm looking at my actions. And so in our culture, I look at, for example, our mainstream education system, our health system, governmental systems. These things that we do belie what our beliefs are. They expose what our beliefs are.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that today, when we do that, it becomes clear pretty quickly that a shift is needed. We need to evolve. We need to progress.
I can see how that's difficult because we're taught from children. I mean, any sort of theorist, Skinner, Erickson, the child is building an identity. And the whole thing we're taught to do as a human is build your identity, be you. Here are all the things we're going to offer you as a parent, as a church, as a school. And then all of a sudden they come meet you. Yes. And you say, let's remove what you know as your truth.
I'm not, all I'm actually inviting is not the removal of your identity or your worldview. I'm inviting simply questioning. It's just an inquiry. So you can inquire into your worldview without removing it. It doesn't undermine anyone to do so. But I do think we've got it sort of backwards. That, I think children have an identity. They don't need to build one. We need to foster the identity that they have. We don't need to impose something on them. So it's for me, it's a whole different way of approaching things. That would put you in the position of finding yourself in connection with a greater whole, and nature being part of that. Yeah.
My grandmother, old Irish woman, took care of me very often. And I kind of could do whatever I wanted. She had sheep on the farm and vegetables, and she didn't care if we wore shoes or not. And those are my fondest memories, was the connection with the animals, yes, the connection with nature. And I used to go help her birth the lamb when it was time. And it's those memories of her taking care of me and being out in nature that are probably the strongest. And when I felt, and even today out in nature, if I see animals, I just feel the most connected.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I teach workshops, I often do this exercise, and it's just basically a memory exercise. And it's like, remember a time when you were in nature, a very special time when you were in nature, and you had this sort of great, beautiful feeling and connection to love of things and connection to things. And almost always it's for people, it's when they were children. They have it in memory back when they were children. So it's yet another of those things that we have when we're kids quite naturally that sort of gets trained out of us.
Oh, yeah.
In our process, yeah.
Oh, sure, because hanging out with grandma at 17 wasn't quite as cool, you know. But you're right, my memories were definitely as a child with farm animals.
Yes.
That's interesting. Maybe I need to go find some farm animals. Although I did recently do a yoga class with baby goats.
Yes, I've heard of that.
Baby goat yoga. You do no yoga. You just hug and kiss these baby goats, which I think is the whole purpose.
Yes, that sounds great.
So we're talking about reconnecting with nature, and you talk about, you know, you do a memory exercise and people go back to childhood. So let's move forward. We're adults. We're trying to connect, trying to find something. What do you do in your lessons and your hiking and your trail guiding to help people really reconnect to nature?
Well, first of all, I want to say that I have a great advantage in my location. So Sedona, there's a lot of new age people here, and it's got a reputation. But you go out on the land here in Sedona, it's got its own special magic. It's a magical place. So the way I put it is, and I think this is true of nature in general, but particularly Sedona, is, you know, the phrase from the Bible, we see through a glass darkly. And in other words, there's kind of between us and seeing truly the existence and the world is a kind of veil. And in nature and in this place, the veil is thinner. It's thinner. Mm-hmm. So there's just this chance, the greater chance that you're going to peek through it. You know? And the more, you know, will seep through past the veil than typically does. And I think that's what happens for people. So it's really, one is a matter of actually getting out in nature and experiencing it, and making sure you experience it in particular kinds of ways, opening to a certain kind of connection. This is where it gets a little tricky because, let's say that we have consciousness, we have consciousness. And we have our five senses. And of course, with our five senses, we're sensing and perceiving nature around us. But we also have our consciousness. And let's say, hypothesize that consciousness is also perhaps our most powerful means of perception. What does it feel like to perceive through consciousness? Well, it all feels like you, right? Because it's consciousness, that's how the nature of consciousness. So when you're out in nature, you start to have particular feelings. And what we've learned to do is to say these feelings and experiences are mine. They're happening here. But actually, I think one can sort of shift perspective and say, actually, these feelings are happening out here, are happening in nature. You see what I mean? And so it's possible that these things don't belong as exclusively to me as I think they do. Mm-hmm. Within consciousness, if I am indeed within a larger consciousness, that larger consciousness will make itself known to me through things that feel like feelings and perceptions and emotions. And so I have to start to get open to the fact that things that I might be experiencing out in nature are coming from nature. They're not exclusively mine. I'm not inventing them and projecting them onto nature. You have to open to a different way of approaching nature. And then I call these hikes daring to believe hikes. So there's a famous quotation from St. Augustine who says, don't try to understand so that you may believe, rather believe so that you may understand. So we get it backwards. So it's like you have to try on a certain kind of belief. Try on this belief that actually we are intrinsically a part of this thing that we're walking out through when we're in nature. And then see what you notice and see what you feel. And the more one sort of practices this, the more you become permeable.
I like that.
Rather having been impermeable to what might be the consciousness around you, you start to become more permeable. And actually one of the ways that I feel that the most is through the word love. And so when I'm out in nature, it's a great hike when I feel a lot of love. And it's not only coming from me towards nature, it's coming from nature towards me. And I want to be as permeable as I possibly can be to love. And I believe it's real. I experience it as real, and I believe it's real, but we have to dare to believe.
As you're talking about that, this notion keeps coming to mind. I think nature, I like that idea of the love back and forth. We are natural beings. It could just be nature is like, thank you for coming home and realizing you're actually part of us still.
Yes.
Because we have denied that. We deny that we're natural.
That's right. And okay, so I do live in a town that has a reputation, and of course I know many people here who might seem a lot further out than me, more way out than me, but communication with nature happens a lot here, and the general sense of communication from nature is that nature actually cares. It cares about us, what we do, what we think. There is a great sort of sense, especially here in Sedona, that it's interested in helping us reconnect. It's that it knows that it's important for us to reconnect.
The unconditional love of nature.
That's right.
It's kind of like, I always think when I go home and my dog sees me, it's no being is happier to see me than my dog every day. And, when I left him all day, he should be really mad at me, but they just don't have that. Nature just doesn't have that. And I like that idea that if you can open up, be permeable, you'll feel the unconditional love of nature.
That's right. And the radical thing for me was because at first I had no trouble feeling love for nature, because I know I love nature. And the interesting question is, why do you love it so much? But then there was this sort of just real sort of insight or paradigm shift that I couldn't tell the directionality of that love, that there were times when it felt like love was coming at me in a big way, and I could barely sort of handle it, actually. And so that was a real sort of shift for me. I had to really open to that idea that wow, this thing that I used to think was inanimate and mechanistic seems to be loving me. And that these things are I think, life-changing, because then what's my relationship to existence? It's changing everything, really.
What a change. You came from nature was mechanical to I love nature, nature loves me, we are one conscious entity.
Yeah, there's this idea. That's true. It has been a journey, and I'm still on it. Actually, I don't say that I'm fully arrived wherever it is I'm going, and nobody knows that. But there is this thing about, yes, there is a kind of unity, and the unity aspect is important, and you can really sort of feel it. So what happened in the scientific revolution is it became very dualistic, and it's really there is a sort of sense of a return to unity, but it's what I call multiplicity and unity. So nature is full of beings, if you like, beings such as trees and plants and animals and rocks, and it's full of these sort of beings which are a kind of multiplicity, but this multiplicity comes together in a kind of unity, and you can sort of feel it. So it's like both these things being true, multiplicity and unity, holding both of those things in the palm of your hands, kind of thing, is this very beautiful thing, which makes me feel like the nature is the sort of middle point for me. Is nature is my really intimate family, essentially.
Interesting.
So,
when you are presenting at into the realm of soul consciousness, do you get into any of this sort of philosophy and personal story at all?
I wasn't going to. So I first of all want to say that I'm presenting with Leanne Holmes, who is an ex-student from Atlantic University, and she did a project with me at Atlantic University the title of which was Nature Mysticism and the Path to Wholeness. And so she did this project, and I thought that the project contained, she came up with many sort of experiential exercises in a very creative way. And I thought when we were talking about doing this conference, that we were going to teach a 3-hour workshop that would be very experiential. And I have exercises, she had exercise, and we were going to use our participants as guinea pigs and make them go out outside the conference room and experience nature. Now it's much more of a presentation, so we're sort of condensing that down, and there won't be so much time to really talk about our own individual history with this. I think it's going to be more of a presentation, although we're not going to abandon experiential things entirely, but we're going to have to, it's going to be more of a presentation about being in nature. But we certainly will talk philosophically, and we'll talk scientifically. So the conference has an emphasis. One of its foci is science and consciousness, right? And so we will talk about science and how it relates to our connection with nature in a number of different ways, and our perspective will be quite different from those of the other speakers, I think.
Good.
Yeah. So because science can demonstrate a number of different things. One is, if you spend time out in nature, you will receive tremendous and measurable benefits. You don't even have to exercise. You just go out in nature and sit. You do that on a regular basis, physiologically, psychologically, sociologically. All of these measurable benefits will happen. And so science demonstrates that about as clearly as science demonstrates anything. So then the question is, well, why would it be so beneficial to sit in nature? I mean, that's where it becomes more interesting, is what is it about nature that is so beneficial and healing for us?
So I think it's interesting to say sit in nature, but also you have to be, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, aware that you're in nature. And what I mean by that is, I've walked my dog, gone and sat on a bench and ate a sandwich, and I'm not aware that I'm in nature. I'm kind of robotically going, and I'm sitting on the bench and eating the sandwich robotically with the dog. And now that you say this to me, I think of all the times I've been in nature and never actually considered it as being in nature. Yes,
I understand that, and that happens to me too. I go on hikes, and like after a couple of miles, I'm like, where have I been?
Yes.
I've been thinking about something. Right? So, but I think that scientifically, we receive these benefits whether we're aware or not.
Well, good. So there, I'm not aware a lot of the time.
It's simply being in nature, and it's not there's no prerequisite on how you be in nature. It's just being in nature. You be in nature, and you could be unconscious, and still these measurable benefits will occur. It may be perhaps it's better if you are aware. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, but I think perhaps psychologically and especially spiritually, being aware is preferable. And so because there are spiritual effects from being in nature.
Sure.
And so I call it my church. So being aware of that, conscious of that, it's like in Judaism, there's about 100 rituals you're supposed to do every day, including how you wash your hands and everything. If you do that in a rote way, then in Judaism you don't have this special intention with which you do the ritual. Then it's not as beneficial by any means. So
I think it could be compared to breathing versus watching your breath.
Yes.
The unconscious nature of just kind of breathing to live.
Yes.
So yeah, I recognize that just being in nature is one thing, but actually understanding and taking the moment. My grandmother always used to have a sit on the lawn, and she'd say, now watch the birds.
Mm.
And I don't very little. Now watch that bird talk to that bird, and then that bird is going to call over to this one. So I did that with my children, and now they're 18 and 21. And we'll sit outside sometimes, and I'm like, Mom, the birds. And I think it is an awareness. It's like breath awareness. You're like, oh, right, look up. There's more here than my own thoughts about work and business and life.
That's right. And that's, part of this process of sort of, I like to think of it as like, what's the boundary of ourselves. Alan Watts called us skin encapsulated egos. But so that we usually think of ourselves as ending right here at our skin. But in this process, you sort of start to expand, and that actually is a visualization you can do. You can visualize expanding the boundaries of your self, your sense of self, to encompass more and more of nature, and then bringing it back, and you can do that. And this mindfulness process is part of this sort of kind of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
You're actually with the birds in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that way.
I've kind of come out of my house, metaphorical or actual, and sat out with them. Yes. And watched the birds call. Yes. Fascinating. So your talk is going to be September 19th.
Yes.
Which is a Saturday. It's going to be via webinar, so you'll be televised all over the world. And Leanne Holmes will be split screen with you from somewhere in the world too.
Florida.
From Florida. Wonderful. So anything you want to say about that talk, or before we close, final comments?
Well, we're going to treat the talk, I love conversations. And I've tremendously enjoyed this conversation with you, for example, and conversations tend to go where they go, but they have their own energy. So Leanne and I are going to treat it like a conversation in which we make sure that we include specific things that we want to communicate about and convey. And then we're going to try and sort of expose, not to demystify, but expose the fact that there's a mystery. And then we're going to try and experientially go into this mystery to experience, so that people will have something that they can walk out of their houses with once the conference is over, and go into nature and take that sense of mystery with them in order to explore how it changes their relationship with nature, their connection with nature. So that's our goal.
Good. And it's a good audience. They are experienced a bit with this. They understand breathing and mindfulness, and very open-minded.
That's right.
You'll have a good audience. So what I'll do is at the end of our talk, I will put in a link to the conference. And I know on your bio page, you have a few videos we've posted just about you and other, I think it was the science and spirituality class that we posted about. So if people want to learn more about Professor Robin Weeks and his work, they can go there. Well, thank you, Robin. I appreciate your time and willingness to talk about your lecture and your courses and your philosophy and hiking in the woods.
Thank you for wanting to interview me. It's not a hardship for me to talk about this subject. I'll talk about it anytime and any place. So.
I will hold you to that.